So right here we have the sine and cosine graphs. And you have to be able to spot when you have the difference between a sine and a cosine. I know sine is red, cosine's blue. But an important characteristic differences between sine and cosine, well, sine always starts and ends at the midline, where cosine starts and ends at the max, depending on if it flips. So also cosine kind of looks like a C, where sine kind of looks like an S. Plus you could also think of sine has 3 times where it hits the midline. Cosine hits the midline twice. There's lots of options on thinking through it, but you have to be able to see the difference between the two graphs. Now next of all, I want to talk about A, B, and K. Now right here we just have sine, but the same characteristics go for cosine. So A, in terms of trigonometric descriptions, A is your amplitude. It's your amplitude. It's how high or low from the midline the graph is going. And the amplitude is always the absolute value of A. Because if it's negative, all that did is flip it, but it's still an amplitude of A. So amplitude is always positive, but the negatives will tell us if the graph will flip in the future. The next part is B. What is this B telling us about the graph? Well, B relates to the period. But it's not the period. It's how you find the period. So B is always going to be 2 pi divided by the period. Oops, I can't spell. Is 2 pi divided by the period. Now, here's a question. If I start with the period, how do you find B? Well, if you need to change that up, if I start with the period, if I know the period, how do you find B? Well, you take 2 pi and you divide by B. Now, your period is always 2 pi divided by B, or if you want B, it's 2 pi divided by the period. The period is a little bit trickier. The B value in period, a little bit trickier because you have to do a calculation. 2 pi comes from the unit circle. One time around the unit circle is 1 revolution. 2 pi is 1 cycle of sine and cosine. So that's why there's 2 pi's there. So B deals with a 2 pi divided idea. And K is your vertical shift, which is, in this situation, we call it our midline. It's called our midline in trigonometry. And it's always the equation y equals k. It's always y equals, and the k value is the equation. So amplitude is always absolute value of the front number. Period, well, it depends on B. You have to do some calculations. And midline is this last number, and it's always y equals that value. So we are going to find, for this equation, this trigonometric function, the midline, amplitude, and period. Well, the midline, oh, by the way, it's map, M-A-P. The midline is your k, which is the number at the end. So our number at the end here is -2. So my midline is y equals -2. Okay. My amplitude is my front number, but it's the absolute value of that. So the front number is 6, so my amplitude is 6. My period, well, my period is 2 pi divided by B. So my B value is 4. So B equals 4. And the formula says 2 pi divided by 4. So I'm going to take and do 2 pi divided by B, which is 4. What do I get when I reduce that? When I reduce that, I get pi over 2. So my period is pi over 2. So the period is always the most annoying because it's not just B, it's 2 pi divided by B. For this next function, it's a cosine, but it doesn't matter. It still has the same characteristics. Midline. Your midline is the last number, so it's that right there. So your midline here is y equals 1. Your amplitude is the front number, but it's the absolute value of that. So your amplitude is 2. Now be aware, what is that negative in the front meaning? It means you're going to be flipping. So there's going to be a flip going on if you were to graph it. but it's really the amplitude is 2. Now the last one's period. The period is always 2 pi divided by the b value. Now for this one, you have to think of b as a third. If you look carefully, that is 1/3. So if b is 1/3, you're going to go 2 pi divided by a third. And the reason I wrote it like that is because this one needs a little bit of calculations, and it helps to write it in that format. So that would be 2 pi multiply by, flip a third, you get 3. So what is 2 pi times 3? That is 6 pi is your period. Okay, so the midline is always a number at the end. Since there's nothing there, are you okay? We're adding nothing, so the midline is 0. Y equals 0. The amplitude is the number in front. So if there's nothing there, that's a -1. But it's the absolute value of that, so it's 1. But we have the word flip, just to remind us, if we graph, there's going to be a flip, an upside-downness nature to the graph. And lastly, our b for the last one is pi over 3. So b is pi over 3. So I'm going to take 2 pi divided by pi over 3. So that would be 2 pi times 3 over pi. Now, since I have a number times a fraction, can I put a 1 right there to help you out? Then can you cancel the pi's, hopefully? Leaving you 2 times 3, which is 6. So your period here is 6. Remember, period does take the most work.